I never thought I'd be the kind of person who ran away from her problems, but here I am 60 years old and sitting in economy class on a plane bound for Bali. My name is Margaret Maggie Thompson, and until last week, my life was as predictable as the sunrise. I spent 30 years teaching middle school English in Portland, Oregon, raised my daughter Emily alone after my husband passed away, and now spend most of my days knitting sweaters I'll never wear and tending to a garden that's more weeds than flowers. But all of that changed when Emily dropped off her golden retriever Max at my doorstep without so much as a heads up. "Mom, I'm going to Cancun for 2 weeks, she said breezily, handing me Max's leash like it was no big deal. "He's all yours." Before I could even process what she meant by all mine, she hugged me quickly, kissed Max on the head and disappeared into her car. That night, as I stared at Max wagging his tail like he owned the place, I felt something inside me snap. All those years of putting Emily first, sacrificing everything for her happiness, and this is how she repays me? By dumping her responsibilities on me whenever it suits her? So while Max snored contentedly on my couch, I booked a ticket to Bali using money from my late husband's savings account. When the plane touched down in Denpasar, I felt lighter than I had in decades. The humid air hit me like a warm hug, and suddenly I wasn't just Maggie the retired teacher anymore. I was someone new, someone free. I checked into a charming little villa surrounded by rice paddies and banana trees. For the first time since, well, ever, I didn't have anyone else to worry about. No lesson plans to prepare, no laundry to fold, no phone calls to answer. Just me, a journal, and an endless supply of fresh coconuts. Back in Portland, though, things weren't quite as serene. Unbeknownst to me, Emily had tried calling several times during my flight. When she couldn't reach me, panic set in. She drove straight to my house, only to find Max happily chewing on one of my slippers and a hastily scribbled note left for Mrs. Peterson next door. "Gone on urgent business. Back soon. Take care of Max." Furious and confused, Emily called everyone she could think of. My neighbors, my friends, even the local library where I volunteer, but no one knew where I was. Eventually, she discovered my passport was missing and traced my flight to Bali. And just like that, my peaceful escape turned into something far more complicated. By the third day in Bali, I was starting to feel like maybe running away wasn't such a bad idea after all. I met a man named Liam O'Connor at the market. One of those effortlessly charming Irishmen with laugh lines around his eyes and stories that made you forget your own name. We bonded over our shared love of books and loss. He lost his wife 5 years ago, and we both knew what it was like to carry grief like a second skin. Meanwhile, back in Portland, Emily's frustration boiled over. She booked a flight to Bali herself, convinced something terrible had happened to me. When she finally tracked me down to my villa, she burst through the door like a hurricane. "What the hell, Mom?" she shouted, her face red with anger. "You just leave without telling anyone? What if something happened to you?" I wanted to tell her exactly why I left, to explain how suffocating it felt to always come second to her busy life. But instead I snapped back. Funny, because leaving Max with me sure didn't seem like much of a priority either. The argument escalated quickly, each word cutting deeper than the last. Emily accused me of being selfish and reckless, while I fired back reminders of every birthday party I'd planned, every school play I'd attended, every sacrifice I'd made for her sake. It was ugly, raw, and exhausting. By the time she stormed out, slamming the door behind her, I felt drained but strangely satisfied. Maybe now she'd understand how it feels to be taken for granted. But as the days passed, guilt began creeping in. Emily stayed in Bali, determined to drag me back home. She showed up uninvited at restaurants, glaring at me from across the room. Once I caught her talking to Liam, clearly trying to turn him against me. "Your mother's acting like a child," she told him loudly enough for me to hear. I bit my tongue, refusing to rise to the bait, but inside I seethed. How dare she judge me when she doesn't know the half of what I've given up for her? Determined not to let Emily ruin my trip, I threw myself into exploring Bali with renewed vigor. Liam joined me on hikes through lush jungles and visits to ancient temples. One evening, as we watched the sun dip below the horizon, he asked me point-blank why I came here. "To get away," I admitted. "From Emily? Or yourself?" His question caught me off guard, but before I could respond, Emily reappeared, this time with reinforcements. A private investigator she'd hired to dig up dirt on me. The PI followed me everywhere, snapping photos and asking intrusive questions. At first I laughed it off, thinking Emily must be desperate if she resorted to spying on her own mother. But then I started noticing subtle changes. Cancelled reservations, locals treating me differently, whispers behind my back. It became clear that Emily had gone too far, sabotaging my trip in ways I hadn't anticipated. Confronting Emily was inevitable, but when it finally happened, it wasn't pretty. "Why are you doing this?" I demanded, cornering her outside a cafe. She smirked, crossing her arms defiantly. "Because you need to grow up and come home," she shot back. "You're embarrassing yourself, Mom." Her words stung, but they also ignited something fierce within me. If she wanted a fight, she was going to get one. That night, I hatched a plan with Liam's reluctant help. I faked a medical emergency, sending a cryptic message to Emily through a mutual acquaintance. "Your mom's in the hospital. Get here ASAP." Predictably, Emily rushed to the nearest clinic only to find it empty. When she confronted me later, accusing me of manipulating her, I didn't deny it. "Maybe now you'll understand what it feels like to worry about someone," I said coldly. Her expression shifted from anger to betrayal, and in that moment, I realized I might have crossed a line I couldn't uncross. The look on Emily's face after I admitted to faking the medical emergency haunted me for days. She didn't scream or cry, instead she stared at me like I was a stranger. "You're unbelievable," she said finally, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and hurt. "Do you even care about anyone but yourself?" Before I could respond, she turned on her heel and walked away, leaving me standing there feeling both vindicated and hollow. I knew I should have felt guilty, but part of me still believed she deserved it. After all, hadn't she treated me like an afterthought for years? But as the hours ticked by and Emily avoided my calls, doubt began to creep in. Was this really how I wanted our relationship to end, with bitterness and betrayal? That night, I sat alone on the porch of my villa, staring at the stars and wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake. Liam found me there, his usual cheerful demeanor replaced with quiet concern. "Revenge feels good until it doesn't," he said softly. I wanted to argue, to tell him he didn't understand, but the truth was he did. Emily wasn't done fighting though. The next morning, I discovered that she'd gone behind my back and frozen the joint bank account we shared. A legacy from my late husband meant to cover emergencies. A curt text message accompanied the news. "Grow up, Mom. Stop acting like a child." I clenched my fists, furious at her audacity. How dare she take control of something that wasn't hers to begin with? Fueled by indignation, I decided to retaliate. With Liam's reluctant assistance, I hired a private investigator of my own to dig into Emily's past. It didn't take long for them to uncover some skeletons. Emails from her college days showing how she'd once considered suing me for emotional neglect after her father died. The discovery hit me like a punch to the gut. All these years I thought I'd been doing everything right, but apparently she'd harbored resentment toward me for decades. Armed with this new information, I confronted Emily in person. We met at a cafe near Ubud, the tension between us thick enough to cut with a knife. "Did you really think about suing me?" I asked, sliding the printed emails across the table. Emily's face paled, but she quickly recovered, her expression hardening. "That was years ago," she snapped. "And it doesn't matter now, does it? You clearly don't give a damn about me anyway." Her words stung more than I cared to admit. I wanted to defend myself, to explain that I'd always done my best, but the words caught in my throat. Instead I lashed out. "Well, maybe if you weren't so selfish, none of this would have happened." The argument spiraled out of control, culminating in Emily storming off with tears streaming down her face. As I watched her go, I felt a pang of regret, but also a stubborn refusal to back down. Over the next few days, Emily and I engaged in a silent war of attrition. She sabotaged my plans wherever possible, canceling reservations and spreading rumors among the locals that I was unstable. Meanwhile, I retaliated by cutting her off completely. No money, no explanations, nothing. It was exhausting, yet neither of us seemed willing to blink first. One evening, as I wandered through the streets of Seminyak, I stumbled upon a small art gallery displaying paintings inspired by Balinese folklore. One piece in particular caught my eye, a depiction of two figures locked in a dance, their movements fluid yet tense, each step a delicate balance between connection and separation. Something about it resonated deeply with me. For the first time, I allowed myself to consider the possibility that maybe this fight wasn't just about who was right or wrong. It was about two people too afraid to let go of their pride and truly see each other. But before I could act on that realization, Emily delivered her final blow. She sent me a formal letter severing all ties between us, financial and otherwise. It ended with a single sentence: "If this is what you want, fine. Don't contact me again." Reading those words felt like being punched in the chest. After receiving Emily's letter, I spent hours pacing the length of my villa, replaying every moment of our conflict in my head. Part of me wanted to call her immediately to beg her to reconsider, but another part, the angrier, prouder part, refused to give in. Instead, I threw myself into exploring Bali with renewed determination, determined to prove to myself and maybe to Emily that I didn't need her approval to be happy. Liam noticed my mood and gently suggested I take a break from sightseeing to reflect on what truly mattered. "Sometimes revenge feels satisfying in the moment," he said, "but it rarely solves the real problem." His words lingered in my mind long after our conversation ended. Still, I couldn't shake the nagging sense that Emily had pushed me to this point, not the other way around. Back in Portland, Emily threw herself into work, using it as a distraction from the gaping hole in her life where our relationship used to be. But her attempts to bury her emotions were interrupted when Max fell ill. The vet diagnosed him with pancreatitis, requiring expensive treatment. Desperate, Emily reached out to me, hoping I'd pay for the procedure despite our fallout. When I ignored her messages, she turned to Daniel, her ex-boyfriend, for help. Daniel agreed to cover the costs, but his involvement reopened old wounds. As Emily sat in the waiting room, clutching Max's leash and trying not to cry, she realized how much she'd isolated herself over the years. Between her strained relationship with me and her reluctance to trust others, she'd built walls so high they left her completely alone. Word of Max's illness eventually reached me through Mrs. Peterson, who mentioned it casually during one of her daily updates. At first, I convinced myself it wasn't my problem. After all, Emily had made it clear she didn't want anything to do with me. But guilt gnawed at me relentlessly, especially when I remembered how much joy Max had brought me during quieter moments. Torn between pride and compassion, I confided in Liam, seeking his advice. He listened patiently before offering a simple suggestion: "Do what your heart tells you, Maggie. Not because you owe her, but because it's the right thing to do." Taking his words to heart, I wired money anonymously to the vet, ensuring Max received the care he needed. Emily discovered the anonymous payment and immediately suspected me. Unsure how to react, she hesitated to thank me directly. Instead, she wrote a letter expressing her gratitude, but didn't send it. Writing helped her process her emotions, leading her to reflect on our fractured relationship. Meanwhile, I decided to return home early, realizing that running away hadn't solved anything. As I packed my bags, I reflected on everything that had happened. The highs of rediscovering myself, the lows of losing my daughter, and the bittersweet lessons learned along the way. Though I dreaded facing Emily again, I knew staying in Bali wouldn't fix what was broken between us. When I arrived back in Portland, the silence in my house was deafening. Every creak of the floorboards reminded me of the emptiness left behind by Emily's absence. Determined to make amends, I visited her apartment unannounced. When she opened the door, shock and anger flashed across her face. Before she could slam it shut, I blurted out, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean for things to get this bad." Emily hesitated, unsure whether to believe me. After a tense moment, she stepped aside, allowing me to enter. What followed was an awkward but heartfelt conversation where we both shared our perspectives. While we didn't fully reconcile, we agreed to try rebuilding our relationship, one small step at a time. In the weeks that followed, Emily and I tiptoed around each other, our interactions polite but strained. We attended family therapy sessions together, though progress was slow and often painful. Despite the challenges, I held on to hope that we could find our way back to each other. One evening, as I watered the plants in my garden, I spotted Emily watching me from the doorway. "Thanks for helping with Max," she said quietly. Her tone was neutral, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of vulnerability. I smiled faintly, replying, "He's family, So are you." For the first time in months, I saw a hint of softness in her expression. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Though Emily and I were trying to rebuild our relationship, the scars remained. Every interaction felt like walking on eggshells. One wrong word could shatter the fragile peace we'd managed to establish. Emily struggled to trust me again while I wrestled with guilt over the damage I'd caused. Our conversations were polite but lacked the warmth they once had. To complicate matters further, strange things began happening in my life. I started receiving anonymous messages, texts and letters accusing me of being selfish, neglectful, and manipulative. At first, I assumed it was Emily's way of getting back at me, but the tone didn't match her usual style. These messages dripped with venom, each one reopening old wounds. One particularly cruel note read, "You think you're the victim? You destroyed your own daughter's trust." The words stung more than I cared to admit. I tried ignoring them, convincing myself they were just pranks or misunderstandings. But as the messages grew more frequent and personal, paranoia crept in. Who could possibly know so much about my private life? And why would someone go to such lengths to torment me? The source of the harassment eventually revealed itself in the most unexpected way. Liam. During one of our rare phone calls since my return from Bali, he casually mentioned hearing rumors about tensions between Emily and me. Something about his tone set off alarm bells in my head. When I pressed him for details, he hesitated before admitting that he'd been sending the messages. "What?" I gasped, my stomach dropping. "Why would you do that?" He defended himself, claiming he acted out of loyalty to me. "You were hurting," he said. "I wanted to protect you, to make sure Emily understood what she did to you." His explanation sounded hollow even to him. I hung up the phone, shaking with a mix of anger and betrayal. How could Liam, someone I trusted implicitly during my time in Bali, betray me like this? Worse, how could he think his actions were justified? Fueled by hurt and disappointment, I ended our friendship abruptly. As much as I appreciated his initial support, I realized now that seeking validation through others, whether Liam or even Emily, had only led to more pain. Without Liam's interference, Emily began to see her own flaws more clearly. She acknowledged that she'd taken me for granted, using me as a fallback whenever it suited her needs. Though she still harbored resentment over my behavior in Bali, she resolved to change. One afternoon she showed up at my house unannounced, holding a handwritten letter. "I wrote this weeks ago," she admitted, handing it to me. "But I didn't have the courage to give it to you until now." Inside the envelope was an apology, a sincere, heartfelt acknowledgement of her mistakes. Reading it brought tears to my eyes, not because it erased the past but because it reminded me of how far we'd both come. Still, forgiveness didn't come easily. When I thanked her for the letter, my voice carried a detached politeness that made her flinch. Part of me wanted to embrace her, to tell her everything would be okay, but another part, the wounded part, couldn't let go completely. Months passed, and though Emily and I maintained regular contact, our bond remained cautious and measured. She threw herself into her career, rising quickly through the ranks at her company, but her ambition came at a cost. She became emotionally guarded, wary of repeating past mistakes. Meanwhile, I retreated into solitude, spending my days gardening and volunteering at the library. One day, I received devastating news. Liam had passed away unexpectedly. Among his belongings was a letter addressed to me, expressing remorse for his actions and urging me to cherish the people who mattered most. Reading it brought me to tears, reminding me of the fragility of life and relationships. Inspired by Liam's final words, I reached out to Emily again, this time without conditions or expectations. When she answered the phone, her voice was hesitant but hopeful. We agreed to meet for coffee, marking a tentative step toward healing. Our reunion was bittersweet. Sitting across from Emily in a quiet cafe, I listened as she opened up about her struggles, how hard it had been to forgive me, how afraid she was of losing me forever. In turn, I shared my own fears, of being forgotten, of feeling invisible. Though forgiveness didn't come easily, we committed to trying harder moving forward. As we parted ways, I watched her walk down the street, feeling a glimmer of hope. Yet beneath the surface, I knew our relationship would never be the same. The wounds ran too deep, the trust too fragile. Still, I clung to the belief that love, even imperfect, messy love, was worth fighting for. Years passed and life carried on as it always does. I grew older, my hair streaked with silver and my joints stiff from arthritis. Emily built a successful career but remained emotionally guarded, wary of repeating past mistakes. Though we maintained regular contact, our bond remained cautious and measured. One day, Emily called with news that took my breath away. She was pregnant with her first child. Overwhelmed with emotion, I offered to help however I could. Emily hesitated but ultimately accepted, marking a tentative step toward healing. When Emily gave birth to a baby girl, she named her Margaret, after me. Holding my granddaughter for the first time, I felt a profound sense of renewal. Her tiny fingers wrapped around mine, and for a moment all the pain and regret faded away. Yet as I gazed at her cherubic face, I couldn't shake the memory of my own fractured relationship with Emily. A pang of sadness reminded me that some wounds never fully heal. Still, I vowed to be the kind of grandmother and person I wished I'd been for Emily. The story closes with me sitting on my porch watching the sunset. Beside me lies a journal filled with reflections on love, loss, and forgiveness. In its final entry I write, "We spend so much of our lives chasing perfection, in ourselves, in others, that we forget how messy and beautiful real connection can be. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is let go of pride and simply say, 'I'm here.'" As the sun dips below the horizon, I close the journal, smiling faintly. Though my journey has been imperfect, I find solace in knowing I tried. Life may not offer us second chances, but it does give us moments to make things right, if we're brave enough to take them.